The Quiet Panic. You guys have been asking me for months to share more babysitting horror stories, and trust me, I've got plenty. But this one is different. This one still keeps me up at night, and it happened over 2 years ago. I'm talking about a babysitting job that came with the most disturbing set of rules I've ever encountered in my life. It was the summer before my senior year of high school. I was 17 and desperately trying to save up money for a car. My parents said if I could come up with half the down payment, they'd help me out with the rest. So naturally, I was taking every babysitting gig I could find. That's when I got a call from this woman named Mrs. Hartwell. Her voice was soft, almost whispered when she called me that Tuesday evening. She explained that she and her husband needed a sitter for their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, every Friday night for the next month. The pay was incredible, way more than I'd ever been offered for babysitting. Like, seriously, it was almost double what other families were paying me. I should have known right then that something was off, but I was blinded by the dollar signs. Mrs. Hartwell gave me their address, which was in this really nice neighborhood about 20 minutes from my house. She told me to come over Thursday evening so she could show me around and go over the rules. When I asked what kind of rules, she just said they had some specific routines for Emma that were very important to follow. She made it sound like typical parent stuff: bedtime, no junk food, that sort of thing. Thursday night came, and I drove over to their house. The place was huge. One of those modern houses with all the glass windows and perfect landscaping. Everything looked expensive and spotless. Mrs. Hartwell answered the door, and honestly, she looked exhausted. She was probably in her early 40s, but she had these dark circles under her eyes that made her seem much older. Her husband was nowhere to be seen, and when I asked about him, she just said he was working late. Emma seemed like a normal kid at first glance. She was quiet, maybe a little shy, but she smiled when her mom introduced us. She had long brown hair and was wearing this cute pink dress. Nothing seemed unusual about her, except maybe how she kept glancing toward the stairs like she was waiting for something. Mrs. Hartwell walked me through the house, showing me where everything was: the kitchen, the living room, Emma's bedroom upstairs. Everything was pristine, like a magazine spread. But there was something sterile about it too, like no one actually lived there. Then she brought me into the kitchen and pulled out this piece of paper from a drawer. She handed it to me and said these words exactly: "These are the rules for watching Emma. They are extremely important. You must follow every single one, no exceptions." The way she said it made my stomach drop a little. Her voice had gone from soft to deadly serious in an instant. I looked down at the paper and my heart started beating faster. This wasn't your typical babysitting instructions. This was a full typed list, single-spaced, with 15 different rules. Some of them seemed normal enough, but others made absolutely no sense. Let me read you some of the ones that immediately stood out. Rule number 3. Emma must be in bed by 8:30 sharp. Do not let her stay up even 1 minute past this time. Rule number 7. If Emma asks to call her daddy, tell her he's sleeping and can't be disturbed. Under no circumstances should you let her use the phone. Rule number 9. Do not go into the basement. The door will be locked, but do not attempt to open it or ask questions about it. I remember reading that and looking up at Mrs. Hartwell with confusion. She was watching me intently, like she was studying my reaction. When I asked her why I couldn't go in the basement, she just said it was for insurance reasons and that there were some valuable items down there. But then I got to rule number 12, and that's when things got really weird. It said, if you hear scratching sounds coming from the walls, ignore them completely. Do not investigate or mention them to Emma. Just turn up the television volume. I stared at that rule for a long time, reading it over and over. Finally, I looked up at Mrs. Hartwell and asked what that was supposed to mean. She gave me this forced smile and said their house was old and sometimes had issues with mice in the walls. She said Emma got scared easily, so it was better to just distract her if it happened. That explanation didn't sit right with me, but the money was too good to pass up. Plus, Mrs. Hartwell seemed genuinely worried about her daughter, and I figured maybe she was just an overprotective mom with some quirky rules. The last rule on the list was number 15. If Emma starts talking about her imaginary friend Marcus, change the subject immediately. Do not engage with this topic or ask questions about Marcus. If she persists, put on a movie to distract her. When I asked about this one, Mrs. Hartwell's face went completely pale. She explained that Emma had been going through a phase where she talked about this imaginary friend, and their family therapist had advised them to discourage it. She said it was important for Emma's development that she focus on real relationships instead of made-up ones. I folded up the paper and put it in my pocket, telling Mrs. Hartwell that I understood the rules and would follow them. She walked me to the door, and as I was leaving, she grabbed my arm gently but firmly. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Promise me you'll follow the rules exactly as they're written. Emma's safety depends on it." The way she said safety made my blood run cold. I promised her I would, and then I drove home with my mind racing. I kept thinking about those rules, especially the ones about the scratching sounds and the imaginary friend. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. That night, I called my best friend Sarah and told her about the job. When I read her some of the rules, she immediately told me not to take it. She said it sounded like the family had some serious issues and I should find a different babysitting gig. But I was stubborn, and that money was calling my name. Friday evening came, and I showed up at the Hartwell house at 6 o'clock sharp. Mrs. Hartwell was dressed up for dinner, and this time her husband was there. Mr. Hartwell was tall and thin with graying hair and the same tired eyes as his wife. He barely looked at me when we were introduced, just nodded and went back to adjusting his tie. Mrs. Hartwell went over the rules one more time, emphasizing that I should call her immediately if anything unusual happened. She gave me her cell phone number and the restaurant number where they'd be eating. Then she knelt down and hugged Emma goodbye, whispering something in her ear that I couldn't hear. After they left, Emma and I settled into the living room to watch cartoons. She was quiet at first, just sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her. I tried to make conversation, asking her about school and her favorite shows, but she only gave short answers. It was like she was distracted by something. Around 7:30, we moved to the kitchen for a snack. Emma was eating some crackers when she suddenly looked up at me and said, "Do you want to meet Marcus?" My heart jumped, remembering Rule 15. I quickly changed the subject and suggested we watch a movie instead, just like her parents had instructed. But as we were walking back to the living room, that's when I heard it for the first time. A faint scratching sound coming from somewhere inside the walls. Emma froze when she heard it too. She looked at me with these wide, knowing eyes like she was waiting to see how I'd react. I remembered Rule 12 and quickly walked over to the TV, turning up the volume like Mrs. Hartwell had instructed. But my hands were shaking as I grabbed the remote. The scratching continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Emma just shrugged and sat down on the couch like nothing had happened. But I could see her glancing toward the wall where the sound had come from. This wasn't the first time she'd heard it. We settled in to watch some Disney movie, and for about an hour everything seemed normal. Emma laughed at the funny parts and seemed to relax. I was starting to think maybe I'd been overthinking the whole situation. Maybe Mrs. Hartwell really was just an overprotective mom, and those rules were her way of managing a difficult phase Emma was going through. But then 8:30 rolled around, and it was time for bed. Emma didn't argue when I told her it was bedtime, which surprised me. Most kids I babysat would try to negotiate for more time. She just turned off the TV and headed upstairs. I followed her to her bedroom and helped her brush her teeth. As she was getting into her pajamas, she looked at me and said, "Marcus doesn't like it when I have to go to bed so early." I felt my stomach drop, but I remembered the rules. I told her we should focus on getting ready for bed instead of talking about imaginary friends. Emma's face fell and she got really quiet. She climbed into bed without another word, and I tucked her in. I was about to leave when she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for an 8-year-old. "He's not imaginary," she whispered. "Marcus is real, and he lives in the basement." Every hair on my body stood up. I gently pulled my hand away and told her it was time to go to sleep. I turned on her nightlight and left the room, closing the door behind me. My heart was pounding as I walked downstairs. I tried to distract myself by cleaning up the living room and checking my phone, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Emma had said. The way she'd looked at me when she said Marcus was real. There was no playfulness in her eyes. She wasn't pretending. She genuinely believed what she was telling me. Around 9:30, I heard Emma's door creak open upstairs. I called up to her asking if she needed anything, but there was no response. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and called her name again. Still nothing. I climbed the stairs and found her bedroom door wide open, but Emma wasn't in her bed. I checked the bathroom, thinking maybe she'd gone to use it, but she wasn't there either. I started to panic, searching all the upstairs rooms. She was nowhere to be found. That's when I heard her voice coming from downstairs. She was talking to someone in the kitchen, having what sounded like a normal conversation, but I could only hear her side of it. I rushed downstairs and found Emma sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of water in front of her. She was talking animatedly to the empty chair across from her, like someone was sitting there listening. "Emma, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked up at me with a bright smile. I'm having tea with Marcus. He was hungry, so I got us some water. I felt sick to my stomach. I walked over and gently took her hand, telling her it was time to go back to bed. But as I was leading her toward the stairs, she turned back toward the empty chair and said, "Bye, Marcus. I'll see you tomorrow." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I got Emma back upstairs and tucked her in again, this time making sure to pull her door completely shut. I stood outside her room for a few minutes, listening to make sure she stayed in bed. When I was confident she'd settled down, I went back to the living room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every little sound made me jump. The house was too quiet, too still. I kept thinking about the basement door and wondering what Mrs. Hartwell was so desperate to keep me away from. Around 10:15, the scratching started again. This time it was louder, more persistent. It sounded like it was coming from multiple places in the walls, like something was moving through the entire house. I turned up the TV volume as high as I could without waking Emma, but I could still hear it. Then the scratching stopped, and I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of the basement door opening. I knew that door was supposed to be locked. Mrs. Hartwell had specifically told me it would be locked and that I shouldn't try to open it. But I could hear the distinctive creak of old hinges followed by footsteps on what sounded like wooden stairs. I sat frozen on the couch, staring at the hallway that led to the basement door. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like someone was trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. They were coming up the stairs. I grabbed my phone and almost called Mrs. Hartwell, but then I stopped. What would I tell her? That I heard someone coming up from the basement. She'd think I was crazy, especially since she'd told me the door was locked. The footsteps reached the top of the basement stairs, then stopped. The house went completely silent again. I waited for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes before I finally worked up the courage to investigate. I crept toward the hallway, my phone flashlight ready. When I reached the basement door, it was closed tight. I tried the handle and it was locked, just like Mrs. Hartwell had said it would be. But I could swear I smelled something strange, like damp earth and something else I couldn't identify. I went back to the living room and tried to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the sounds were just the house settling, or maybe there really were mice in the walls like Mrs. Hartwell had said. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard. Mrs. Hartwell and her husband came home around 11:30. They both looked relieved when they saw me sitting calmly in the living room. Mrs. Hartwell asked how the evening went, and I told her everything was fine. I didn't mention the scratching sounds or Emma's conversation with Marcus. I definitely didn't tell her about the basement door. She paid me in cash, and as I was leaving, she asked if I'd be back the following Friday. The money was too good to turn down, so I said yes. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma's words. Marcus is real and he lives in the basement. I went back the next Friday and the Friday after that. Each time the same strange things happened. The scratching in the walls, Emma talking to her imaginary friend, and that awful feeling that something was watching me from the basement. But I followed the rules exactly as they were written, and Mrs. Hartwell never suspected that anything unusual was happening. It wasn't until years later, when I was in college, that I found out the truth about the Hartwell family. I was scrolling through local news articles for a research project when I came across a story that made my heart stop. The headline read, "Local man arrested for kidnapping after victim found in basement." The man's name was Marcus Hartwell, Emma's father. He'd been keeping a teenage boy locked in their basement for months before the police finally found him. The boy had tried to escape multiple times, scratching at the walls and making noise to get attention. Emma knew he was down there the whole time. That's why she called him her imaginary friend. It was her way of coping with something too horrible for an 8-year-old to understand. Mrs. Hartwell claimed she had no idea what her husband was doing, but the police found evidence that she'd been helping to cover it up. Those rules she gave me weren't to protect Emma. They were to protect their secret. She needed someone to watch Emma who wouldn't ask questions or investigate the strange sounds coming from the basement. I never saw the Hartwell family again after that last Friday night, but I think about Emma all the time. I wonder if she's okay now, if she's getting the help she needs. And I can't stop thinking about how close I came to discovering their horrible secret. What would have happened if I'd tried to open that basement door? Would I have become another victim? Or would I have been able to save that boy sooner? That babysitting job taught me to trust my instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is, and no amount of money is worth ignoring those red flags. I still babysit occasionally, but I'll never forget that disturbing list of rules, and I'll never forget Emma's whispered words. Marcus is real, and he lives in the basement.